Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining NextLabs for our webinar titled Protecting Critical Data in Cloud-Based Services. My name is Tiffany, and I'm happy to host this webinar. I am proud to introduce today's speaker, Sudhindra Kumar. Sudhindra is a principal software engineer at NextLabs. He has extensive experience in designing enterprise software products and is responsible for the design and the development of rights management products at NextLabs. His areas of interest include data security in the cloud, system performance, virtualization, and agile methodologies. He blogs on topics related to cloud security and has played various roles in product R&D and technical marketing, working closely with multiple Fortune 100 customers spanning across industries. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Sudhindra.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon which part of the world you're joining in from. Let's get started. So this is going to be our agenda today. We'll start off with a brief introduction about the different types of cloud services and the comparison of the different cloud service models. And then we'll see what are the key data security challenges that organizations face when they move to the cloud. And then we will see what are some of the best practice recommendations for securing your data in the cloud. And finally, we will close off with some Q&A. So let's start off on a lighter note. So here's a Dilbert classic on cloud computing. So I'll give you a few seconds to just take it in. So Valley doesn't present a pretty picture of the cloud there, does he? Right. So, but don't worry, things don't have to be so bad as Valley is portraying it here. So in this session, we will see some of the options which can actually offset some of the concerns about data security in the cloud. So what is cloud computing? So it's an on-demand self-service which helps provisioning of computing capabilities automatically as and when needed. It provides broad network access, which means that the resources can be accessed across multiple networks. It could be from within your organization's network, it could be through a VPN, or it could be from the public cloud, from the public internet as well. And all the resources can be accessed via multiple platforms, for example, laptops, mobiles, or tablets, and so on and so forth, right? So these are some of the characteristics of cloud computing. And it allows for better resource pooling, wherein the provider's computing resources can be pooled to serve multiple consumers simultaneously. It also provides rapid elasticity, wherein the resources can be elastically provisioned and released on demand. And it's a measured service, so the resource usage in the cloud can be monitored, controlled, reported, providing transparency to consumers as well as the service providers. So these are some of the key characteristics of cloud computing. Let's look at some of the different cloud service models. First, you have the infrastructure as a service, where the operating system, the virtualization platform, if any, the servers, the storage, and the networking are managed by the vendor. And you as an organization manage the applications, the data, the runtime for the application, and the middleware, if any, right? All these are managed by the organization. So this is categorized as infrastructure as a service. Next comes platform as a service, where the runtime and the middleware are also managed by the vendor. And the applications and data alone are managed by the organization. Some of the examples of PaaS are the Google App Engine, Salesforce.com, Heroku, etc. And when it comes to software as a service, everything, including the applications, the data, all the way to the storage and networking is managed by the vendor. And some of the examples of SaaS providers are the Google Apps, the Microsoft Office 365, Salesforce Desk, etc. So these are some of the examples of the different cloud service models. Now let's do a quick comparison of the various cloud service models that we just saw. So when it comes to the consumer, who's the consumer of a SaaS model? So it's the typical end user himself. The people who are going to actually use the data become the end users. In the case of PaaS, it's the application owner who's the consumer of the PaaS service provider. And in the case of infrastructure as a service, it's the application owner or the IT. And what kind of services provided by cloud here? So in the case of SaaS, a complete finished application is the service that is provided by the cloud. In the case of PaaS, they provide you the runtime environment for the application, and they provide you the storage and other cloud services such as any integration that might be needed. And in the case of infrastructure as a service, they provide you the virtual server and the cloud storage and the networking. So what are the service level coverages for these three different types of the service models? So in the case of SaaS, they ensure that you get maximum application uptime, and the performance of the application is also managed by the SaaS provider. In the case of platform as a service, they ensure they provide you with environment availability and performance. So the application coverage is under the purview of the organization. And in the case of infrastructure as a service, everything including the virtual server, the time to provision, etc., is provided by the infrastructure as a service. So there is no platform or application coverage in the case of infrastructure as a service. So in the case of when it comes to customization, SaaS provides minimal to no customization, but with the proliferation of SaaS, more and more SaaS providers are providing a lot of customizations to meet each and every organization's needs. PaaS provides you a high degree of application level customization, but you're constrained by what is the platform that is available to you. But within the application, you can do whatever customizations you want. And some applications might have to be rewritten to suit the platform that is available to you. In the case of infrastructure as a service, there are very minimal constraints on the applications installed on the virtualized or virtual OS builds. So what are the different deployment models in the cloud? The first one is a private cloud, which is the cloud that is deployed primarily for the use of a single organization. This provides higher levels of protection to your data because all the data resides in your own organization and you have complete control over it. Second comes the public cloud, where the services are shared by multiple organizations or with the public. Typically, this is run by a cloud service provider. The advantages of a public cloud are scalability and cost effectiveness. It can scale really well. The hybrid cloud is a combination of both a public and private cloud, which marries the advantages of both the private cloud and the public cloud. It provides you scalability and cost effectiveness, while at the same time it can provide you higher levels of protection wherever needed. For example, you can have your financial business application running in your private cloud and a collaborative application which hosts non-sensitive data. You can use a public cloud for that. So that's a hybrid cloud. So how do these different types of cloud deployments fare when it comes to real-world environments, right? So based on a survey covering over 1,000 technical professionals across a broad cross-section of organizations, it was found that 29% of the organizations use public cloud only 7% use only private cloud, and a majority of 58% actually use a combination of public and private cloud. So this is a sign of things to come, wherein people are using public cloud for less sensitive information, and when it comes to confidential data, some of them prefer using a private cloud. So what are the different authorizations? So how do the authorization layers perform when it comes to the different cloud models, right? So as you move closer towards, infrastructure as a service, you have better authorization control, and as and when you move outwards towards SaaS or data as a service, so you're outsourcing more and more of the control to the service provider. So what is data as a service? This is a new term that we are hearing, right? So this is the place wherein people provide or organizations provide you data as a service, where you can purchase data based on your needs, or it could be through a subscription, or some of them could be free, and so on. So initially it started off for web mashups, but now it is being employed more and more commercially. Just to give you an example of what data as a service could be, for example, you can have a phone number that has to be checked against the do not call databases in real time. So there could be do not call databases, right? So you don't have to maintain that. There are data providers available who can provide you this information as a service, and you just check whether the given phone number is listed in the do not call database there. So this is just an example of data as a service. So in the case of centralized on-premise company authorizations, you'll find that you have equal amounts of control. You can exercise equal amounts of authorization and access control on the different layers. For example, on the network, you can control who gets access to the network, who gets access to the platform, the application, and then the data. So you have multiple layers of security here. But when you move to a decentralized SaaS kind of an authorization, you'll find that you can still have some amount of control on the outer layers like the network, platform, and application, but majority of the data control you have to depend on the actual control of the data itself. So the authorization would have to be more dependent on the data layer, and the amount of control that you can have on the outer layers decreases exponentially. So here's some data that gives you some confidence on the growing adoption of cloud services. From hovering somewhere around say 60 to 70 billion dollars in 2011, it is projected that by 2017 it would touch somewhere close to 250 billion dollars. So there's a good growth, and this is a sign of things to come, wherein more and more people are moving to the cloud, including confidential information. Right? So what are the business applications that are migrating to the cloud? So according to a survey, you can find here that people are moving even critical information like say your financial data or compliance management or security management data to the cloud. For example, the data that you see here is, for example, for security management, around 34% of the respondents of the survey said they are either planning to move within the next 1 to 3 years from a current 11%, which is a huge growth, right? It's like 3x growth of the number of people who are planning to move their security management stuff over to the cloud. And you can find that already a lot of collaboration and conferencing solutions and email and messaging, etc., a large percentage of it is already being done in the cloud. And the encouraging sign here is that people are confident enough now to move even confidential information like your financial data or compliance management, etc. Even those are being moved to the cloud. So what are the security and compliance barriers to adoption of the cloud, right? So there was a question which was posed to multiple respondents asking, which of the following are the key challenges to your approach to cloud adoption? And as you can see from the highlighted points, majority of them were related to data security in the cloud. It was like data loss and privacy risks topping at around 30%, security risks, risks of IP theft, legal and regulatory compliance related concerns, and transparency of operational controls and data. So a majority of concerns that people raised when they were moving to the cloud were related to data security and availability. But so in the next few slides, we'll see how we can alleviate some of these concerns and what are the options that are available to us for safeguarding our information in the cloud. So what are the key data security challenges in the cloud? The first and foremost is protecting your IP from criminal attacks. The number of hacks that you're hearing about, the number of data leaks that are happening, the number of breaches that are happening is alarming, right? So the first and foremost is how do you protect your intellectual property from any kind of nefarious attacks? The second one is how do you audit, report, and check your regulatory compliance when your data is in the cloud? How do you ensure that you remain compliant with all the regulations governing data, especially if you're handling sensitive data or if you're in the domain like say aerospace and defense or finance and so on, right? So how do you remain compliant with all the government regulations? So that's another important concern that many organizations have. The next one is the data residency and the multi-tenancy. So where does your data reside? How safe is it? Right? So that's one big concern that many organizations have. For example, there are regulations which mandate that any personal data of your consumer should reside within that particular country's jurisdiction. For example, European Union mandates personal data should remain within the European Union. And there are some governments which also mandate disclosure of cryptographic keys on demand. So if your data resides in a country where the government of that country can ask for the cryptographic keys of your encrypted information to be disclosed to them, then how safe is the information, right? So you may not be very comfortable having your data reside in a country like that, right? So these are some of the concerns that people have. And if it is a situation, how safe is my data from being accidentally or by intentionally being shown to some other organization, right? So these are some of the key concerns that people have when they migrate to the cloud. And the next one is, how do we protect the data which is being transferred from your organization from any endpoint to the cloud? And when it is being stored in the cloud, how do we protect that? We'll see some of the options that are available for this in the next few minutes. Another major concern is the security of the interfaces and the APIs that are exposed in the cloud. A lot of interfaces are exposed by the cloud service providers for ease of automation and for end users case and so on. So we need to see how we can secure these interfaces. We'll see shortly how many of the data breaches that have been happening are because of insecure interfaces that are provided. And malware infection has always been a major concern, be it on on-premise or whether it's in the cloud. So this is yet another concern that people have. The next one is data breach notification. So no matter how much care you take for safeguarding your data breaches do occur, and we have been seeing it on a regular basis. So the question is, how fast and how effectively does your cloud service provider notify you in case of a data breach, right? So according to a report based on publicly available data, around 254 data breaches were reported in just the first 3 months of 2014. And this is a growth of over 230% over the same period last year. This is a huge increase in the amount of data breaches that have been happening out there, right? So the notification and the handling of a data breach is of a major concern for many organizations whenever they are moving to the cloud. The next one is data retention and secure disposal of data. So it's not just enough to safeguard data when it is moving around. It's also important to know how long I should retain the data and how do I safely dispose of the data once the data exceeds the retention period. For example, there are regulations, for example, HIPAA, which mandates that key information should be stored for at least 6 years, right? So there are government regulations which mandate data retention for a specific amount of period. And typically, highly sensitive data is retained for longer duration compared to less sensitive data. And so you have to be well planned. You should have a well-defined plan to handle the data retention periods and how to get rid of them when you're done with it, right? So not just the well-defined data retention periods, there could also be on-demand cases. For example, there's the right to be forgotten or right to erasure, the new policy that has been implemented by the European Union, which lets any end user to ask a service provider to remove all personal information about them. And the service providers are obligated to get rid of all this information as much as possible, right, in a reliable manner. So it's not just about planned data removal, but we should also have plans in place for on-demand removal of data. So all these need to be taken into account. So these are some of the key data security challenges when people are moving to the cloud. So based on a study by the Cloud Security Alliance, these are some of the categories of vulnerability incidents. And you can see that the biggest category here is the insecure interfaces and APIs, wherein people have opened some keyholes, some holes in the interfaces that they expose to their services. The next one is the data loss and leakage. So these are some of the key vulnerability incidents that have happened, and hardware failure could be due to denial of service attacks, etc. And the other category of vulnerability incidents was under inadequate infrastructure design and planning. So these are some of the key categories of vulnerability incidents based on a study. So data breaches. So as I discussed, data breaches always occur despite all the care that is taken, though we would like to not have any data breach at all, but to face the reality, yes, they have been occurring on a regular basis, right? So Verizon did a data breach investigations report, and they found that 92% of the over 100,000 incidents that were analyzed over the last decade could be categorized in just 9 basic patterns that are listed here. Some of the key ones are the web application attacks, insider misuse, and then payment card skimmers, denial of service attacks, cyber espionage, etc. So we'll see some of the options that are available to us to avoid some of these data breaches. So this chart shows you data from the same report, the data breach investigations, and as you can see here, this is the number of breaches per threat category over a period of around, say, 10 years now, right? And one interesting thing you see here is the physical theft or physical data breaches. Physical causes for data breaches are actually seeing a downtrend. This could be because of the bigger proliferation of cloud services, wherein you don't need physical proximity to the data to actually misuse it, right? So everything is available in the cloud. Hackers have a higher probability of getting to your data, right? And that's what we see here in this report as well. The hacking related data breaches have been increasing rapidly since, let's say, 2008 onwards, right? We see an increasing trend in hacking here, and malware and social. So these are some of the things that have been growing rapidly over the last few years. And how ready are enterprises for the cloud? So according to a study, we found that just 53% of the respondents said they have security policies in place for the cloud, which is grossly inadequate for a secure cloud environment. And how many people have decided which application should go or should not go to the cloud? Just 42%. And how many people had the availability of, or disaster recovery policies for the cloud? Just 32%. This clearly shows that even though organizations want to move more and more of the services to the cloud, they are not ready yet for handling the safety of the data in the cloud. So these are some of the key concerns that need to be addressed by the organizations. And we'll see what are the options we have for doing the same in the next few minutes. So what are some of the best practices for protecting your data in the cloud? The first one is to come up with a good data governance strategy. The next one is multiple options for data protection, which include encryption of data, attribute-based access control, data masking, rights management, and encryption proxy in case of, say, SaaS applications, right? So we'll see each one of these in detail. The next one is data residency. So where does your data reside and how safe it's sit in that physical location? So that's one more thing. We'll see how to do those things. And incident response plan and business continuity management. So when an incident occurs, when a data breach occurs, how well do you respond to it and what is the business continuity management plan you have in place for ensuring that your business continues to perform, right? So we'll see each one of these in detail now. The first one is the data governance strategy. To come up with a good data governance strategy, the first step you need to do is to identify data stewards. So who are data stewards? These are the guys who are going to define your data governance strategy, who are going to define your policies, who are going to see what kind of data you have, etc., and all that, right? So these people should be chosen from a cross-domain team, from across the multiple departments in organizations. So that is a key requirement for identifying effective data stewards. And these people should have in-depth knowledge of your business processes and the data. So these are some of the key points when you're selecting the data stewards for your organization. Once the data stewards are identified, the next step is to audit the existing data. So it may sound surprising, but the truth is that many organizations do not know what is the kind of data they have, what are the data usage patterns in my organization, who has access to what data, and so on. So this is the information that many organizations lack today. But this is a key point when it comes to a good data governance strategy. So you first need to do an audit and see what are the data, identify what are the kind of data that I have, the different types of information, etc., where it resides, and what are the access patterns of data within my organization. So this is the first thing that needs to be done. And once you have done that, assess the value and utility of all the data that you have. This is the next step. Once you have done that, you need to classify the data. So data classification can be done based on the jurisdiction of the data, of the origin, where the data is currently stored. There could be contractual risk constraints and the sensitivity of the information, etc. So these are some of the attributes based on which you can classify your data. Once you have classified the data, you should calculate the risk. So it's not that all the information needs to be saved with the same kind of security. Could be less sensitive data which you can spend less on safeguarding. Protection of data comes at a cost. Nothing comes for free, right? So the amount of data controls you have is going to cost you money and time and resources. So it's important to make sure that you differentiate between sensitive data and less confidential information or public information, and make sure that the stress is laid on the sensitive information. So you should assess the cost of protection versus the importance of any data. So that has to be done. Once you have done that, define your data governance policies. So this is why you say, okay, who gets access to what? What is the life cycle of my data? Where does it reside? All these things are defined in the data governance policies. And what happens when the data reaches its expiry date, and so on and so forth. So all these are defined in your data governance policies. And when you're defining your data governance policies, ensure that you consider any regulatory compliance that you need to be compliant with. For example, the PCI DSS in case you are in the credit card business, or HIPAA if you are in the healthcare business, or the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the FISMA, etc., etc. Right? So ensure that you are on the right side of the law. And you should adopt consolidated sets of compliance regulations. So a lot of these government regulations have overlapping conditions. So you may avoid some of the duplicate efforts by trying out some of these standards. For example, ISO IEC 27002. So this is a standard which is available for compliance regulations, etc. So you can try adopting some of these standards to avoid some of the duplication in the effort. And once you have defined these policies, you have to notify it to all the members of your organization and ensure that everybody abides by it. And you need to continuously monitor the efficacy of the policies. How effective are the policies in practice? Are there any leaks despite these policies? And if yes, it requires a constant review of the policies to adapt them to any new changes that are needed. And there are many places wherein the government regulations, for example, they keep changing, And so you need to make sure that you keep reviewing your policies on a regular basis to adapt to the new mandates. And it might be helpful to maintain liaisons with local regulatory authorities when you're dealing with sensitive data. So the first step here is the data classification, which is identification of sensitive, structured and unstructured information that persists across applications. So the first step is to come up with a model and a schema definition for your data classification. There are different classification techniques like metadata tagging. You can let the user to label the information, or it could be derived from business association. So depending upon the business workflow, you can have different classification of the data. So depending upon which stage of the workflow the data is in, you can have a different classification based on the business associations. Or it could be based on the content analysis. For example, if some document has some, say, a social security number, mark it as confidential. Or if it has some, say, bank account details, so mark it as confidential, and so on and so forth. So it could be based on content analysis. So there are many tools available for data classification based on all these different options like content analysis or metadata and so on and so forth, right? So you can use any of those tools for data classification. But one important thing is that in data classification, you have to ensure that the data classification persists across applications throughout the life cycle of the data. That's a key point there. So how do you define the information control policy? So an information control policy is a digital rendition of an organization's compliance, legal, and security policies. So it includes environment, identity, and information. So it could be attribute-based policies which provide dynamic evaluation, or it could be information-centric, where a single policy works across applications and systems. So there are different types of policies, right? So what does a policy definition contain? So here's an example, right? Who's accessing, using, or sharing what data, how they are accessing it, why they are accessing it or sharing it, and with whom are they sharing it, right? So these are some of the key policy definitions for information control. So identity, what all comes under identity? The user, the recipient of the information, it could be internal and external. So what is the environment? The computer or the system from where the data is being accessed. It could be the network location, where is the data being accessed from. It could be the channel or application, or the connection, and the time. So at what time of the day is the data being accessed? Is somebody accessing some confidential data after office hours? Is that allowed? And so on and so forth, right? So these are some of the factors that fall into the environment category of a policy definition. The next one is the information itself. What is the type of data that I am looking at? What is the metadata for this? Are there any custom tags? And what is the content of the data itself? So these will fall under the information category. Let's quickly look at a good information control policy. So here's an example which says, allow only US engineers to access Project X specifications from US offices. So what all does it cover? It covers the identity of the user, where the location is US and the department is equal to engineering. And what is the information? Project is X and the type is, it's a specification. And what is the environment? It could be like the location, or it is like the network address is 192.* which is for my office, US office network, right? And so this way, this is an example of an information control policy which covers the identity, information, and the environment. So the attributes-based rules, they provide complete details of the business intent. They provide you fine-grained data level control. Next comes record keeping and reporting. So this is a key part which is needed for checking how effective your policies have been. Are there any gaps that I need to address in my policies? So for that, you need to keep recording the data of activity across the life cycle of your information. and across applications, and see what are the kind of access patterns and what are the exceptions that have occurred in your environment. And you should integrate that with any of the security information and event management systems that your organization might have, so that you have a single window from where you can see all the compliance data, right? The next one is, this is critical to monitor compliance. And you should keep refining your policies based on this audit information. Keep checking how the policies are performing and keep refining them. So the next option that you have for protecting data is encryption. So encryption is important for both data that is being transferred as well as the data that is stored. So encrypting data at rest is more important in the cloud where data resides outside your organization. And this needs a well-defined key management infrastructure, which includes generation, storage, distribution, recovery, and destruction of the keys. There are cloud service providers which give you the option to use your own key management infrastructure as well. So my recommendation would be to use your own key management infrastructure, right? And you can safeguard the keys using secret sharing, where the key is split and shared across multiple people, and the original key can be constructed only when all the parts of the key are recombined together. So this is one option for protecting the keys themselves, right? The next one is the attribute-based access control, which provides you data-level access control based on dynamic, externalized authorization logic. This gives you based on the identity, information, and environment attributes, which can come from different sources within the organization. For example, your user information could come from LDAP, the file attributes could come from CRM, and some network information might come from some other place, right? So one implements ABAC is XACML. So the next option you have is a hybrid crypto system. So typically the public key crypto system is more convenient, but the symmetric key crypto system is more efficient from time and resources perspective. So what the hybrid crypto system does is it encrypts the actual data with a symmetric key, and a symmetric key itself is encrypted with a public key crypto system. So this way, the amount of time spent in encrypting the actual data is reduced using a more efficient symmetric key crypto system. So examples of this hybrid crypto system are OpenPGP and PKCS7. And another upcoming technology here is homomorphic encryption, where computations are performed on the encrypted data itself, not on without having to decrypt the data. So there are also open source library available for this. For example, there's something called HElib, which is an open source library which implements this homomorphic encryption. The other option that you have is to do data masking. So here you don't encrypt the whole data, which can be expensive, but you replace parts of the critical data with irrelevant characters. For example, you may remove the SSN information and replace that with some irrelevant characters. But you should make sure that the data remains meaningful for the entire application logic. So different data masking techniques include the substitution, shuffling, or nulling out or deletion of parts of the data, and so on. So there are many vendors who provide data masking technology solutions already on the commercial space. So all these are okay when it comes to the other, say, PaaS or infrastructure as a service. So how do you protect your data in SaaS? You have multiple options here. The first option is to trust the provider and rely on their internal controls, which could include encryption and dispersion, etc. Or if your provider gives you a client application that encrypts the data and sends it to the provider. So, but here you have a dependency that your data provider should give you that option. The next option is to encrypt the data locally before you send it to the service. Or you could use something called as an encryption proxy to encrypt and decrypt data that goes to the provider. So these are third-party applications which are built specific to specific SaaS applications, and these encrypt only critical information that is being transferred to the SaaS provider. So that way you can actually easily do this by using these encryption proxies. So here's the growth of crimes in insider crimes as well as customers and suppliers. So how data breaches have been happening over the last couple of years, right? You see that across categories like current employees, former employees, service providers, and so on, you see that the crime rates have increased compared to 2013. So how do you protect this kind of threats, right? So one option here is rights management. So encryption that we saw now is not a silver bullet for all your security concerns. So you should consider using rights management to control access to your cloud data. So you can control and audit the use of data on the endpoint, including who can access the information, who can print the information, or is somebody allowed to edit some confidential information, or can they copy paste this information into some other resource, right? So using a good rights management product, you can actually control what people can do with any information that they have access to, right? So rights management plays a very important role in controlling what happens within the organization. So as we saw, rights management can help you protect and control documents that are downloaded from the cloud or are being uploaded to the cloud. So there are products which provide you browser-based access as well for rights management. For example, NextLabs itself has a product for this. And there are products which provide you support for mobile devices as well. Irrespective of how the end user is accessing the information, it could be from their personal laptops, or it could be from their mobile devices and so on. So there are products which are available which can actually implement rights management irrespective of the endpoint. So this will play a key role in controlling data usage in your organization. So here are some of the key points that you need to consider when you're signing the SLAs with your cloud service provider. The first one is the data residency. Decide where the data is going to reside. This is required from a compliance angle as well. Check the business continuity management plan of your CSP. How do they plan to ensure business continuity management? How well do they handle multi-tenancy? What is their data retention and disposal plan? This is important from a compliance and security perspective. Check if they provide you the option to audit the data retention and disposal. When they say they're clearing up the data, check if they are actually cleaning it up, right? So ensure that all this is covered in your SLA. And then check their incident response plan. Ensure that whenever breaches occur or a security incident occurs, how well do they respond to it and what's their plan? So incident response plan and business continuity management, how critical is it? So we should always ensure that we have a good monitoring infrastructure in place to know when to trigger an incident response. From this figure, you can find that, so this figure shows you the impact of 8 factors on the per capita cost of a data breach. And it was found that people who had a good response plan and a BCM involvement, they had a lower per capita cost for data breaches. So data breaches are become less expensive for these organizations, right? So you should ensure that you have a good incident response plan and also a business continuity plan so that you can activate it as and when required. So diligent planning can help you minimize the impact of a breach as you migrate more and more data to the cloud. So these are some of the options that we just discussed that can help you for securing your information in the cloud. So with meticulous planning and comprehensive data governance strategy, we can mitigate the risks that are involved in migrating to the cloud. So those are the options that we discussed just now. I hope this was useful for everyone. So just to give a brief introduction about our company. So NextLabs is a policy-driven, provides policy-driven information risk management software for global 5,000 enterprises, and we help companies achieve safer and secure internal and external collaboration, and we ensure proper access to applications and data. So we specialize in this area, right? So with that, we finish the presentation part, and we'll open up for questions. Okay, there is a question on is there any regulation or benchmark standards available to audit the cloud service providers? So there are many organizations, many governments which also provide standards on this. They provide guidelines. For example, there are guidelines available on the SLAs themselves, for example, right? So when you're going to sign an SLA with a cloud service provider, what are some of the key points that you should take into account? For example, auditing of their data residency or data removal and so on, right? So there are a lot of guidelines available from many non-profit organizations as well as some of the governments. So there are many guidelines available which can be referred to before you sign any SLA with your cloud service providers. So there's another question. More and more employees are using cloud storage services and they're using it to share potentially sensitive data. How can I ensure sensitive corporate data is not inappropriately shared through these services? That's a very good question. So there are multiple options that you can consider for this. So using cloud storage services like say Dropbox or Box.net and Google Drive, etc., is becoming more and more common in enterprises these days. So how do you protect your information here, right? So there are multiple options. It's going to be a multi-pronged approach to it. So the first one is network controls. Look at network controls to prevent access to some of the sites that you don't want your users to use. The next one is no matter where the data is, keep it encrypted. So encryption is a very key point, very key component of protecting your information. Ensure that data stays encrypted, whether it is within your organization or it is being stored in the cloud. So that way, even if it gets into the wrong hands, it's not very useful, right? The next option that you need to consider is to have a good rights management plan. You should ensure that you have a good rights management plan to make sure that people can, you have good control over what people do with the data that they have access to. So these are the three things that you can consider for controlling how people use the cloud storage: network controls, encryption of the information, rights management. So it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to have better security there. Okay, the next question, okay, how the US government would treat export control data sent through cloud-based email. So some of the regulations, for example, for ITAR data, just to give you an example, so the data should reside within the US jurisdiction, right? So that's one of the key requirements. So in such cases, you can have the data reside within the US jurisdiction and see how you can provide access to your external partners who may be who may or may not be under the US jurisdiction. So that's one option. So in case you are using something like say Office 365, so which provides you dedicated plans, which are offerings that are delivered from a specific data center and equipment where equipment is dedicated to your organization alone. Or there are plans available from these cloud service providers which ensure that the data always resides within the jurisdictional location. So there are these options available with the cloud service providers which you can actually use. So do we have any information related to how the government departments are moving towards cloud service usage? So as we saw, it's not just the private organizations that are moving towards the cloud, but also a lot of government organizations which are looking at getting the benefits of a good cloud service, right? So many government services are also utilizing cloud services, all the different cloud service models, but they ensure that a lot of care is taken before they move to the cloud. They have multiple levels of analysis performed before anything is actually moved to the cloud. So are all the different cloud services compliant with the US export control regulations? So that's the question. Are all the different cloud services compliant with US export control regulations? So there is no guarantee that all the cloud services are compliant with the US export control. For public cloud, there are considerations about foreign admins and foreign data center. So many of these government control regulations also have some provisions because of the kind of multi-location centric organizations that are present today. So there was a question on what does NextLabs bring to the table when you partner with some company, say for example CSE, products or services. So we provide classification, data protection, and rights management, right? So we partner with software integrators. They provide implementation and the consulting services. There's another question on how can I ensure clean data disposal in the cloud once the data has reached its expiry date, right? So if the data is encrypted, there are multiple options, right? So if the data is encrypted, you can consider crypto shedding, where the encryption key itself is deleted, ensuring that any encrypted data is no longer useful. Override the storage media with new or dummy data. That's another option, because just deleting the information is not good enough. There are ways where deleted data can also be retrieved. So it's important that you rewrite the storage media with new or dummy data. This is relatively less expensive, but it's time consuming. The other option is degaussing, which is removal or reduction of the magnetic field of the storage device itself. This is quick, but can quickly or permanently damage the device. Or the final option is physical destruction of the storage itself. So these are some of the options for removal of the data when it comes to the cloud. And the other option, the next question is, what options do I have to protect data in SaaS services? So are encryption gateways the right solution? So as discussed, so encryption gateways are third-party providers which encrypt or tokenize the data, only the critical data. They need not encrypt all the information, right? So this way they save on bandwidth and resources. Encryption gateway providers, they support many common and popular SaaS offerings, and these are built specific to the specific SaaS offerings. And so these can be tried out. This is one good option apart from just trusting the encryption that is provided by the service provider. So you can use these encryption gateways. So, but keep in mind that this will always have an impact on the latency and performance of the application. And also keep in mind that this is just an emerging technology. So I would recommend that you go in for short-term contracts, because we don't know what future will have in store for us, right? So more and more new technologies are being brought in for protecting information. So this is one of the new emerging technologies, encryption gateways. So if at all you're planning to use it, a good option would be to go for short-term contracts with them. I think we're at the top of the hour. So what you can do is you can always get in touch with us. I'll pass it back to Tiffany. Before that, I would like to thank everybody for joining in. Tiffany, over to you.
Thank you, Surihindra, for a great presentation. Before we end today's call, I would like to encourage all of you to reach out to Ruth Stevens to request a copy of our white paper on IP protection in automated information handling, or schedule a meeting with Ruth to find out about our solution for information risk management, or schedule a demo. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next week, so please watch out for it. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope this session has been informative for you. This concludes our NextLabs webinar. Bye-bye now.